the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all of this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with money.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
In the United Kingdom, the definition of rape is written to exclude all forms of sexual assault committed by women. This means that no matter what level of sexual violence a female perpetrator might engage in, the recourse her victim can have will not include being recognized as a rape victim, or knowing that their perpetrator must bear the stigma of the label rapist. The crime may be counted among some crime statistics that are used to influence law and policy, but not rape statistics. Further, if a female perpetrator sexually imposes herself on a male victim by forcing him to penetrate her, that crime falls into the category causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent, which literally describes the act as if the victim were an active participant, regardless of whether he was conscious and unrestrained but coerced, or whether he was overpowered, or whether he was prevented from fighting back through restraint or incapacitation. In this way, while victims of male perpetrators are fully recognized as victims of a crime involving imposition, specifically male victims of female perpetrators are described almost as co-conspirators in their own crimes. While the perpetrator's jail sentence may be the same, the wording of the law betrays a stark difference in compassion for victims of the wrong category of sexual violence. HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. There have been several petitions to update the definition of rape to include female perpetrators, folding all crimes committed through imposition of sex involving penetration of or by the victim into that one category. Parliament has rejected all of them. Feminists have ridiculed the idea, stating that because the crimes to which female perpetrators are subject still carry the same terms of imprisonment, there is no discrimination in placing a different label on male perpetrators. Ignoring for a moment the inequality of conditions of imprisonment between the sexes in the UK, especially after feminists have fought to replace just women's imprisonment with therapy, let's consider a gender-reverse scenario. Were it the other way around, with any crime at all being uniquely branded with a more stigmatizing label to be communicated to the public forever after one's sentence was served, only when the perpetrator was female, would feminist activists tolerate that? Of course, we cannot expect them to care if their hypocrisy is known. As identity politics ideologues have shown over the past few years, they do not care if any of the flaws of their purported beliefs or their character are revealed, as long as they face no related consequences. Well, intersectionalist feminist narratives around gender and transgender issues may have just created one. For years, intersectional feminists have admonished the public that gender and biological sex are social constructs, the definitions of which are negotiable at best. We are told that it is sexist to rely on the biological science of anatomy to determine the sex of an individual, even though most individuals do that in regard to their own so-called gender identity. Instead, gender identity ideology is the only truth, and you're sexist if you either fail to accommodate it or have the audacity to notice any details that contradict it. This has resulted in changes to the dynamics of gender identity as well. In the past, individuals who identified as transgender did so because they had experienced gender dysphoria, a sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. In response to this, they either had or were preparing to have gender reassignment surgery, the process referred to as transitioning to the opposite sex. This preparation used to involve extensive therapy and hormonal treatment, as well as changing one's style of dress and all other behaviors to live as a member of the opposite sex for a year to acclimate oneself and one's social circle to the change. Now, under the intersectional feminist standard to be considered transgender, all one has to do is adopt a label for one's gender identity. This has been adopted in some corporate and even government policy, including National Health Service policy. NHS policy on delivering same-sex accommodation states in its guidance that patients should not normally have to share sleeping accommodation, toilet, or bathroom facilities with members of the opposite sex, nor have to walk through an area occupied by patients of the opposite sex to reach toilets or bathrooms, except for hallways. However, it also states that transgender people should be accommodated according to their presentation, the way they dress, and the name and pronouns they currently use, regardless of the physical sex appearance of the chest or genitalia, regardless of whether or not they have a gender recognition certificate or legal name change, and regardless of whether they live continuously or temporarily in a gender role that does not conform to their natal sex. This means a person can live as their birth sex up to the day they go to the hospital, but be accommodated as a member of the opposite sex upon admission if they simply arrive there dressed as such and describing their gender identity as such. In light of all this, let's consider Haley Dixon's recent Telegraph article. Hospital told police patient was not raped because alleged attacker was transgender. Dixon reported that the House of Lords has recently been informed that, despite the assault being confirmed through closed-circuit television and witnesses, the hospital told police there was no male in the hospital, therefore the rape could not have happened. The issue was raised with the House of Lords by Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne, who attributed it as a direct result of NHS policy. The result of Annex B is that hospital trusts inform ward sisters and nurses that if there is a male as a trans person in a female ward and a female patient or anyone complains, they must be told that it is not true. There is no male there, she told the upper chamber. The victim, she told them, almost came to the edge of a nervous breakdown during the year it took for the hospital to admit the assault had occurred, because being disbelieved about being raped in a hospital has been such an appalling shock. The article goes on to describe conflicts between the interests of women's groups and those of trans rights campaigners. LGBT advisor Dr. Michael Brady promised that the commitment from the team leading on the review is supporting the maintenance and strengthening of trans rights in the update. Meanwhile, Baroness Fox of Buckley referred to him as the opposite of impartial and called the review not satisfactory because it has no public terms of reference and is being carried out in secret. In response to the complaints of Lady Fox and Lady Nicholson, Lord Etherson QC is quoted as arguing that the current policy was entirely appropriate and consistent with the anti-discrimination law in the Equality Act. The complaints of the women of the House of Lords would be familiar to victims of female-perpetrated sexual assault, especially male victims who experienced the imposition of reproductive sex, and then were told they were not rape victims because women cannot commit rape. While it is reasonable that there is outrage over the bad policy and subsequent gaslighting in the hospital incident, it certainly begs the question as to why there is no such outrage over the plight of similarly marginalized male victims. Does being excluded from recognition as a victim of rape really only look like a problem when a woman experiences it? If so, why would that be the case? How can that be viewed as equal treatment? And if we are to accept that trans women are women regardless of whether they have transitioned or not, isn't defining rape around the use of a penis also discrimination against them? After all, other women cannot be charged with rape, but non-op and pre-op trans women can. Can't they? Can we untangle the Gordian knot of mental gymnastics that intersectional feminists and other gender identity ideologues have woven around these issues? This week, HBR Talk will examine this incident and its implications in regard to these questions and more. You can find a link to the stream, running at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, at honeybadgerbrigade.com. And, of course, that is right now. So, hello and welcome to HBR Talk 217. Woman Faces Standard Male Experience, Women Outraged. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren B. and Badger-in-Chief Allison Tiemann to strip the paint off of a badly covered hole in the logic of feminist dogma.
That sounds painful.
Oh boy. Oh boy. It sounds exciting. No.
Yes, it is. It is very exciting.
It sounds like vaginal rejuvenation.
Vaginal rejuvenation.
Yep, we are.
Some vaginal rejuvenation.
Stripping the paint off, guys, of a badly covered hole.
Peel back those layers of roast beef.
Oh,
Come
God.
on. Let's do it.
No. The mental images. But first, as always, we gotta do what we gotta do, and this time around it is even more important. Rather than my usual message that you're all used to hearing regarding our funding platform, feedthebadger.com, I've got some information to share. Earlier this week, political commentator Sydney Watson posted to Twitter a message she'd received from Patreon's Trust and Safety, explaining that she has been banned from the platform for violating community standards. She went on to say, "I never actually post anything to Patreon itself, so they're banning me purely based on what I've said on other platforms. Even then, reading through their guidelines, I haven't done a single thing listed." Yesterday, she published another message from them confirming that they, quote, "take into consideration activity taking place outside of their platform," and have asked other creators to delete content from other platforms in order to have their accounts reinstated. "This is batshit," Watson said in one tweet. "This platform can hold your money hostage if they don't agree with what you do everywhere else. Insanity." The upshot is this. As far as any political commentator should be concerned, relying on that platform for funding is treading on thin ice, or building your house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. If you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. As always, remember folks, information is power. We have it, they hate it. If you want it, you've got to go to honeybadgerbrigade.com and check out the latest feed from the Badgers and feed the Badger to help make it possible for us to share the news and analysis you come to HBR to hear. And before we go on to talk about the rest of the aspects of this story, I just want to remind everyone of something in light of the near-nervous breakdown suffered by the victim of this incident over just the hospital administration not calling her experience rape. When asked to consider voting to change UK law to recognize male victims of female-perpetrated reproductive sexual assault as rape victims, female MPs balked. And MP Jess Phillips, in particular, laughed and ridiculed the idea.
God.
Okay, so I have questions.
Yeah.
All right, so just to clarify the incident in question. So the hospital didn't just refuse to call it rape. Did they not recognize it as a sexual assault?
Yes, they told police that the rape could not have happened because there was no man there. So, in the ensuing police investigation, the police had to discover by watching CCTV, closed-circuit TV, that, yes, actually, it did happen.
I'm sorry, when in their law system were healthcare hospital workers in charge of determining whether or not an offense has occurred?
2003.
I mean, you're telling the police that, oh no, this crime didn't happen, officer. You don't have to do your job. I'm a nurse.
Yeah.
What in the fuck is that?
Well, the medical establishment is making a lot of choices in terms of our bodily autonomy now.
Yes, they are. They are taking liberties.
Yeah, that's all we could say. They are taking liberties, shall we say? And it doesn't surprise me that they'd be taking liberties of defining what is sexual assault. Because the reason why I asked this question is, presumably, she was still sexually assaulted, even though it was by a woman. So they should have reported that. If this issue, like what they've said, as you were saying, Hannah, is that they don't need to call it rape because it's the same kind. It's considered to be the same crime under the law, and yet for some reason, if it's a woman, this particular hospital feels free to not even call it sexual assault.
Yeah,
that's what I'm getting at. Not even call it, like, if this was a man and a woman, they wouldn't have called it sexual assault. Like, if this was a man and a woman who had a vagina, they wouldn't call it sexual assault.
It's important to note that the hospital staff and the hospital administrators are not the ones entirely responsible for this. They were following the National Health System policy that is based on legislation passed by Parliament. So that's
what
why
the hell?
Yeah.
What the ever-living hell?
Legally,
so
they are not allowed to call a trans woman a man. They're not allowed to acknowledge that a pre-op or non-op trans woman has a penis, even under that circumstance, because it's considered discrimination. So therefore,
that's not even what I'm getting at.
They're
also not.
Therefore, they have.
They're
no
also
way
not
of,
acknowledging.
Yeah, they have no way of answering that the assault happened because they would have to admit that a penis was used.
Well, but here's the other thing. They should have been able to say an assault happened if it was a woman with a vagina.
Right.
So it's not just.
Don't you care about these people? Don't you care about the women's? Why can't you? If she's saying that something happened, where are the police? Who cares?
I'm getting even deeper into this.
Ooh, please
Deeper,
go.
more layers of insanity. And I apologize. Scipio is wanting me to play ball. It's very inappropriate at this moment, but he has his own priorities.
Yes.
They're opposed to mine. Okay, just a second. I'm gonna have to do something with the pooch.
All right, while you're doing something with the pooch, I'm gonna.
We're watching Allison evolve into Hannah or Karen.
Yes, there we go.
Shut up, dog!
No, I'm gonna point out. So here's the situation. Under UK law, just for people who live outside the UK, especially like Americans, because our law is very different here. All forms of sexual penetration are labeled rape under our law, whether the person who commits the crime is penetrating the victim or is forcing the victim to penetrate. Although it's harder to get the latter prosecuted, it is labeled rape, right? But under UK law, the only thing that can be labeled rape is sexual penetration with a penis. It has to be. It's actually in the law. So, if you are a male victim of a female perpetrator, forced to penetrate the female perpetrator, it is not labeled that. It is it's actually labeled being forced to engage in sexual contact or something. And then, if you're a female penetrated by another female, it's called a sexual assault. But if it's a male that's forced to penetrate, it's not even called a sexual assault. It's called that third option, which actually describes the incident as though the male was voluntarily participating.
That's in the UK.
Consent.
So
that's in the UK, and that's where this happened.
Oh God, what the fuck is wrong with you Britons?
Yeah. So this woman is
get
gaslighted,
into the 21st century.
Right? This woman is gaslighted to a near nervous breakdown by the fact that her rape experience wasn't acknowledged, and that sets these women in Parliament off. But these are the same gender of Parliament members, right, who ridiculed the idea of acknowledging victims of forced reproductive sex, where a baby could be conceived, where a disease can be passed from the rapist to the victim, if those victims are male and the perpetrators are female.
Okay,
or
so
even if the perpetrator's male.
Okay, well, that wouldn't be reproductive sex unless
it wouldn't be
they're
reproductive
creating lawyers.
Sex, but unless the perpetrator uses his penis, any rape, any oral rape of a man by another man isn't considered rape there either.
Okay, my point is I think we're missing something in all of this. They didn't even report a sexual assault happened, so apparently they have some kind of policy in place that if it's a woman or identifies as a woman, there's no sexual assault could possibly happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's even worse than no rape could happen. No sexual assault could happen. How does such a thing occur?
Well, see,
in
a
presumably first world country. How does that happen?
What I wonder is if the perpetrator or assumed perpetrator had been a female, would they have then been inclined to say that, yes, this was an assault? And yes,
no, obviously not.
But see, the thing that I'm kind of touching on is that because this is a person that identifies as a woman, that automatically absolves them of any kind of guilt, right? Because I just identify as a woman. It's a female penis. Can't you see? It's a female penis. How can I have possibly penetrated this other person with my female penis?
Well, but of course, I've actually seen where non-op trans women use the term clitoris to describe their penis, because that's what a woman has, right? And so they rename it, right? Now, and personally, I'm all in support of treating people like human beings, regardless of who they are. but treating people like human beings. Human beings are accountable, right? Because we have intelligence. We have the capacity to understand when something that we do to another person causes that person harm. And we have the capacity to have enough compassion for other people to feel guilty when we hurt someone and to try to avoid hurting someone. And being trans doesn't exempt you from that expectation, right? So as soon as somebody who is trans starts demanding that, starts gaslighting other people and demanding that other people not acknowledge biological reality, and as soon as that person starts saying, you have to put up with behaviors from me that you would not put up with from other people, then that's not legitimate. You don't have a right to do that to the people around you. That's just as bad as any other form of psychological abuse, and nobody should have to take it, right? And as soon as you start getting into the sexual end of that and the sexual abuse end of that, then it becomes an issue of, we want the right to commit crimes and not be held accountable for them. And my answer to that is fuck no. Nobody has that right.
You mean like women?
Right.
Well, women do sort of.
Yeah, women do sort of, but so part of what needs to be unpacked here is, if you go back through feminist lobbying history in the UK with regard to female perpetrated crimes, and I sort of glossed over this in the opener because I didn't want it to be 20 minutes long. They've been fighting to eliminate women's prisons in the UK for since at least 2012. I remember the first article I read about it was published in 2012, but I'm sure it was prior to that. What they want is, when a man commits a crime, he goes to prison or jail, depending on the severity of the crime. But when a woman commits the same crime, they want her to get therapy. And their argument is that women are not malicious when they commit crimes, but men are, which is in and of itself sexist, right? I mean, that's there's no other way to describe that. That is flat out sexist. People commit crimes for malicious reasons, and sometimes people commit crimes out of desperation, but it doesn't go along gender lines, all right? Sometimes men are desperate, sometimes women are desperate. Most of the time when people commit crimes, they commit crimes because they are disregarding the rights and boundaries of the rest of the community. And it's not whether they consider themselves to be malicious or not. It is malicious to feel entitled to disregard those boundaries for your own benefit. And so here we have, if you actually had equality under the law in terms of labeling, let's say the UK law became the same as the US law that I described. Pretty much any form of sexual penetration, whether it's by the perpetrator or of the perpetrator, is labeled rape, right? We could have that under UK law, but under feminist advocacy, they would still want it to be treated differently when women do it, right? So in addition to women not getting the more severe label, when they do what is essentially the same thing, violating another person's bodily autonomy in a way that can transfer a sexually transmitted disease, and under some circumstances can create a pregnancy, right? They do the same thing. They cause pain and suffering. They cause emotional damage that the person has to recover from. They put a stigma on that person. They put that person through a memory that isn't going to go away ever. And so on, right? They might do physical damage. They might actually do relationship damage between that person and the people that they have close relationships with. All kinds of things stem from being assaulted, and it's even more complicated when the assault is a sexual assault. But they get a lesser stigma from having committed that because they are not labeled a rapist. They're just labeled a sexual assailant, and it's forgotten, right? So in addition to that, they may have a shorter jail time. They may not go to prison at all. They may have probation within the community. They may have better chances at therapy, and the therapy that they go through may treat them in a more compassionate manner than the therapy that a male sexual assault perpetrator goes through. So they're getting lower punishment every step of the way, regardless. And what that basically does is it communicates to both the public and the victim that it's not as big of a deal that this victim has been through this experience because the person who inflicted the experience was female. It could be exactly the same experience with exactly the same detail except for the presence of a penis, right? That's the only difference. And yet you're not allowed to have your experience acknowledged, and you're not allowed the same level of compassion, and you're not allowed the recourse of knowing that there is that same level of shame attached to having done that to you, that person that did that to you would face, because your perpetrator is female, and therefore it's not as big of a deal. That is very cruel. And I just can't, I don't know if I can stress it hard enough. Like, and I'm not saying that sexual assault victims of various types of sexual assault are wrecked for life, because we're not. But it's still, to have somebody turn around and treat you as if your experience matters less, and your the harm that you experienced, you're not allowed to need the same recovery, and you're not allowed to expect the same recourse because of who did it to you. That's incredibly discriminatory.
I'd like to just to add to what you're saying. You know that, oh boy, Scipio really is not giving me a break today. You know the usual statement in these kinds of discussions of sexual assault.
Yeah.
They say things like, even though, men can be assaulted, of course, women are primary and essential and majority and overwhelming and most important victims of rape or sexual assault. You know those statements? I'm being a little bit facetious, but they always put them in. And I look at them and I'm like, well, what is the motive for doing this? You're supposed to be a resource. If you're a resource for all victims of sexual assault, what's the point of opening your doors, saying, come on in, we're going to help you, we're going to support you, and then you stop the men as they're walking through and say, hey, we just want you to know that what happened to you was rare, and it was of less statistical significance and not as socially important, and doesn't really reflect societal. We want you to make sure that your victimhood doesn't threaten our narrative. And feel comfortable here. Like, what is the mentality behind that? What is the mentality to even put it in there? What does it serve? If you offer the services, whoever comes through the door gets them. If it's more men, it's more men. If it's more women, it's more women. Why do you have to put right up in the door, we offer services for men and women, but you got to know that the men are the less important victims. You got to acknowledge that before you walk through here. Why do you do that? Why do they do that?
In all honesty,
what's the mentality behind it?
Well, it is the mentality behind it, but that's also because it's been reinforced by the government the government funds that go into the care and consideration for women and what they need. And it's who cares what men need? Who cares if men need more than women do? It's the women who need something. And those dirty, filthy men, they can find their own way, right? How did they even end up here? Oh my God, go away. It's our time. We need something. It is the mentality. It has seeped into the consciousness of society that women are just the weakest things on earth and they always need help. And oh my God, if there's something going wrong, then you gotta step in and help them. And be damned any other person who also might have fallen into their situation, who might also need help and not identify as a woman. Did I say, is that the PC way is that the way to say it now? Right? Can we not say male and women, men and women? Ugh.
You know, honestly,
also,
I think the real mentality behind that is the same mentality that would say, you know, let them eat cake, right? And just for the record, cake didn't refer to like the confection, like the dessert that you think of when you think of cake. Um, Bread used to be baked in big brick ovens, and there was a formation of a sort of precipitate, I guess you could say, of like flour and butter and steam and so on around these the edges, the bottom, and everything of these ovens. That was you could eat it. It would provide some nutrition, but it wasn't intended to be eaten. It was like the cast-offs of what you need to keep the bread from sticking to everything, and it had to be scraped out of the oven every day, and it was basically just you know because it was flour and butter and steam, you know, whatever was left over from not sticking to the oven, it would be harmless to eat it, and it might actually sustain an individual. And yes, as in caked on, that jumped way up. Yes, Amsang, as in caked on. That was what cake referred to. If they cannot afford bread, let them eat the cast-offs from the inside of the oven. It'll keep them alive. It'll keep them sustained. It's not real food. It's not good food, but they won't starve to death, right? And like the whole idea of that quote, whether it was a real quote or not, being out of touch today comes from people thinking that she was suggesting people eat a luxury and enjoy a luxury if they can't afford something basic. What she was really saying was, well, the poor, they're so unimportant, they don't need anything nice. They don't even need anything normal. They can just have our cast-offs of the barest, necessities to be able to survive. And that is the way feminists treat male victims of all forms of intimate partner and sexual violence, and all forms of family violence, including baby boys that are neglected to death by their mothers, right? Feminists do not care about men. If they cared about men, they would not treat male victims that way.
If they cared about men, they wouldn't have jobs.
True. Well, okay, a couple of things that I wanted to point out. Well, first of all, it seems like this particular trans woman is getting all of the benefits for that feminists have decided to accrue women when it comes to sexual assault, and traditionalists to a certain degree. But I think feminists really took the ball and ran with it. So, what is the argument? What argument could they possibly bring to bear to deny this woman the same privileges as a perpetrator of sexual assault that they've afforded all other women, except that she isn't a woman? Well, good luck with that. Mm-hmm. Good luck with that. Enjoy that argument. I think you will lose it. So maybe a better idea would be to decouple rape and sexual assault from the configuration of genitals that the perpetrator has. You know, just be like, you know what? It doesn't freaking matter, because the real issue is the destruction, and the real issue is the abuse of something that's supposed to be intimate and forms a very essential component of being human and our identity as humans. Okay, we are probably the only animal that really understands the nature of consent, and that is because we have a theory of mind that is very evolved. It's why we dislike rape so much, because it defies the very foundation of our identity as humans. And that is true for men who rape and for women who rape. The genital configuration is irrelevant. It is the denial of another person's consent and ignoring the idea that they have their own mind. That's the harm. And you can do that with a vagina, and you could do it with a penis, and you could do it with everything in between. But because feminists want to give female rapists a unique and privileged position in society to be able to continue to engage in their activities, uh-oh, intersectionality has brought them to a little bit of a sticking point in their philosophy, because now trans women can enjoy those same privileges that they are giving all female rapists. And the only argument they can have against it is that she isn't a woman. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I don't weep for you.
Imagine feminist logic as a landscape, or even just like a room that everybody has to walk back and forth through, like, you know, the foyer of a business or whatever, the opening, the central room of a business, right? And in the middle of this logic is this great big hole that you have to pretend some things are not real in order to adhere to their ideology, right? You have to pretend biology is not real, biological sex is not real, and you have to pretend that gender identity is more physically real than biological sex, right? You can't just talk about respecting people's boundaries and respecting people's humanity and not bullying people for being different. You have to actually go deeper than that and pretend that you cannot see what is visible and you cannot recognize what is physical, right? That's how far you have to go. So this hole is pretty deep. This hole is a big, fat, deep hole right in the middle of the room, like big enough that your whole damn foot can go down into that hole. And you're not allowed to acknowledge that hole is there. It's not real. You can't admit to it, and you're not allowed to look at it. You're not allowed to look near it. And so as you walk through that room, you just have to like go boldly forward in whatever direction you're going and just hope that you bypass that hole. You can't step over it. You can't change your pattern in order to avoid it. You just have to pretend it doesn't exist. And every fucking time some poor schlub breaks their ankle in that hole, you have to pretend, and they have to pretend, that nothing has happened. They have to just keep stumbling along on that broken ankle because it can't be broken because that hole is not there, so they couldn't have stepped in it, right? And nobody can have compassion for them because if they have to point out that hole in order to get help for their injury, then you know they're actually breaking the rule of not acknowledging that hole in the logic. And it gets bigger every time something like that happens. It feeds on the gaslighting that goes on around itself. And at this point, we are in a situation where with the size of this hole, we're just throwing entire people into it, right? Because we have an individual who has a problem, right? Nobody commits a sexual assault, especially under circumstances like that, unless they have a problem. They have some sort of mental health problem. That is not a mentally healthy behavior. It's not a normal behavior, right? So for a year, nobody acknowledged this person's problem. Nobody acknowledged that this person was dangerous to other people, and nobody acknowledged that this person had some sort of brokenness that they needed psychological help, psychological treatment in order to fix or at least improve to the degree where they will not be dangerous to other people and they will not put themselves at risk of further punishment. And now, of course, the case is progressing. Now it's been acknowledged that the assault happened, the crime was committed. The crime's probably going to be labeled rape under the law because there was a penis involved. And this person
with
who
the
identifies...
the perpetrator's penis.
Yeah, the perpetrator's penis was involved. So this person who identifies as a woman, and this may be a person with real gender dysphoria, this may be a pre-op, not a non-op, this may be a person who genuinely has a whole other spectrum of issues that also are needing to be addressed, right? And they're going through all that and needs help being able to recognize and respect other people's boundaries, and figure out exactly what led them to do that. And it took a whole year for this person. She's going to get punished, but it took a whole year, and now she's not going to be treated as a woman, is she? She's going to be treated as a man in the court system because penis, right? So other women cannot get convicted of rape, but women who are trans women can, if they are non.
I think the trans lobby should really get on that.
Yeah.
I think that's a severe human rights imposition upon trans women, and I think you guys really should get on that and make sure that you are afforded all of the privileges that feminists have granted female rapists in under the law. But the other thing I wanted to mention is feminists can't acknowledge the way to solve this dilemma that's really, really, really simple. Oh yes, Hannah knows.
Well, there's
exactly
what I'm going to point out here, because trans women are not the only transgender people. So there's a segment of the male population that can be convicted of rape in the UK, and a segment of the male population that cannot. So cis men are being discriminated against, whereas trans men can't be convicted unless they have been given through surgery a penis. And of course, this also means that post-op trans men are discriminated against for having had their surgery. So UK, you better get your shit straightened out. Personally,
there's
I think
such
the
an
solution
easy
is
way.
very easy. Yeah.
Yes, it's such a simple thing that feminists cannot acknowledge. It's like that doctor that you trip people up. I can't operate on this boy. He's the son, and everybody's like, oh, but his father died in the crash, and it's like, no, that's the mother, right? This feminists cannot see this very simple solution. It's well beyond them. Yeah. Just make it so that when a woman uses her vagina to rape another human being, it's rape.
Yep.
Okay, just make it so that women and people who identify as women can be labeled rapists and be charged with sexual assault, and get rid of whatever weird policy is in the UK medical system, in which, I don't know, some woman can go grab herself a 4-year-old boy and go to town on him, and they see it on closed circuit TV, and it's like, oh yeah, that didn't happen because it was a woman. Like, what is wrong with you in the UK? Like, what are you freaking doing?
In all honesty,
what are you doing?
In all honesty, I think the label rape should just be eliminated from the law altogether. And if somebody were to say, all right, here's a pen and some paper, you write the new laws. I would look at the way laws are worded, educate myself on how to do it. But by the end of what I got done with it, we would have a set of assault laws that had, instead of saying we have a set of assault laws and then we also have a set of sexual assault laws. Nope, if the assault was sexual, that would be an aggravating factor. I think that's what it's called, where it makes it a worse assault crime, but it would still be categorized as an assault. And if it was sexual and physically violent, as opposed to using incapacitation, that would be yet another aggravating factor. If the person's incapacitation was caused by the perpetrator, right? Another aggravating. Everything would just add to the severity of the assault. And we wouldn't have, if it's gendered, if it's a penis, if it's a vagina, if it's this, if it's that. Nope. If you sexually violated the other person in the process of committing an assault. So an assault would have to be required, right? And the idea of consent would be replaced with the idea of contravening someone else's boundaries, just by virtue of having that as an assault. You can't consent to be assaulted, but you can you can recognize when someone deliberately contravened another person's boundaries. And that would solve a lot of problems. We wouldn't need to use the word rape. We could just have varying degrees. You could have, just like you do with homicide, there's first degree, second degree, third degree. There's murder has its own label. But in terms of assault, you could do that with degrees and aggravating factors, and that would add to the charge, and it would add to the sentence. And if the aggravating factors included a sexual nature to the assault, that could add to, does the person need to be evaluated as a danger to the community, particularly in that vein, and then sent to therapy, and so on. You wouldn't have any of these gender issues around the law if that was the case. It would eliminate it, or at least it would go much further toward eliminating it. And it might actually start to help us on the pathway to eliminating gender gaps in penalties.
What I wanted to say about this, to bring it back to the trans issue, is what I've noticed is that people somehow think it's trans women who are getting away with it. No, they're getting away with this because women get away with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't get around this. And I've seen, jokes like, there was a joke, I think, on Family Guy where a trans woman was looking at pornography at a bar, and one of the managers of the bar came up to her and said, "You can't do that." And she said, "Well, but I'm a trans woman." And he said, "Oh, well, I guess the rules don't apply to you." I'm like, no, dude, no. The rules don't apply to women. It's just so happens that trans women have been grandfathered in. I don't know, maybe grandfathers not. They've been somehow, put into that category. They have been put into that category. And what I would say to trans activists is, when people say that, when they say that you are getting privilege, you're getting some kind of benefit that you don't deserve. I'm sorry, women have always got those benefits. So if we're going to recognize trans women as women, then they should get those benefits too. Or, and this is what probably blows feminist minds, we just get rid of those benefits because they're disturbing. It is disturbing to allow female rapists, I'm going to use the term rapists or sexual assaulters, to get away with their crap. It is disturbing to allow female domestic abusers to get away with their crap. It's disturbing to allow female criminals to get away with their crap. So either recognize that trans women, you deserve the privileges that women get because they are women, or take those privileges away across the board and make it equal. Start treating women like men under the law. Or, just grant them to trans women. And then also recognize that any man who identifies is a woman. You could have men who are gender fluid who identify as women for the purposes of the criminal court or for the family court. As under these principles, this is how our world works. So, there you go. Let's go. Let's do it.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. If you're going to open the door to gender fluid and having people be like, today I identify as a canary, or today, since I'm going into family court and I'm fighting my ex-wife for custody of my children, I think I identify as a disabled lesbian trans woman. Yeah.
And Allison,
that's going to be my identity for the day.
But
Yeah, super.
I said,
yeah, we understood. I think mostly what you said. You were talking about the gender fluid spectrum and everything, and I'm gonna expand on that a little bit. This is something that this is something that the description of gaslighting specific to 1984 kind of went into. All right, there is an aspect of postmodernism that is very prevalent in progressive ideology, and that is the idea that if you describe something differently, it changes its reality, and it's just blatantly false. Describing something differently doesn't change what it is. Okay? Describing something differently might change the way you think about it, but it doesn't change reality. Reality is not subject to your magic words. And unfortunately, we have gotten to a situation now where, and I think this is something that happens anytime human creativity is stimulated, right? But we've gotten to a situation where, because of postmodernist thought being made more acceptable than biological science in the political arena and in the gender theory arena, we now have this situation of just this exponentially snowballing idea of gender identity. And previously, you know, in the 20th century, when people were trying to find a balance between acceptance of gender identity as a thing and recognition of biological reality as the norm, and figuring out a way to be able to respect, treat people who were trans women or trans men as human beings and in need of medical assistance, and not, you know, some kind of weirdos that should be bullied for being different, which, you know, a lot of us, you know, in the nerd community understand pretty much what it's like to be some kind of weirdo that's bullied for being different, right? So I think nerds probably were some of the first people to be more accepting of this, even though nerds also understand biological science, right? But we had this change from being able to recognize, hey, this person is experiencing a mental health condition. We don't have all the answers on how to fix this, but we do have this method of treatment that seems to be working for some of them. And if they're going to go through that treatment, we should respect their humanity and treat them with dignity and not shame them for it, right? And that's our placeholder for this is what we do in this situation until we get something better that we can do for them. And that is okay. That is not bad. Recognizing that medical science doesn't have all the answers, but here's an answer that we can use until we get a better answer. And we shouldn't treat people as less than human because they've had to use that answer. That's not bad. But it is bad to come along and say, all right, in order to be able to say that we are treating those people with respect, we now have to accept anything you say about your identity. Anything. And it's reality now because you said it, and it's reality now because you believe it, and you have to ignore any contradiction to what the person says, no matter how ridiculous you have to get in your behavior and your interaction with that person in order to accommodate this ever-increasing spectrum of odd and unusual quote-unquote gender identities, many of which are actually just sexual preferences. And I'm not buying it. I don't accept that. Just like if somebody were to ask me in terms of like the sexual preference spectrum and everything that I think is okay for me, right? Everything that I think is attractive to me, they would probably come back at me and say, well, I would label you a pansexual. I won't accept that label. I think that label is stupid, unnecessary, and redundant, right? And it's actually, I consider it demeaning. I don't think it's not just requiring people to acknowledge an entire spectrum of things that maybe I don't agree with. It's imposing on me to the status of utilitarian placeholder for that requirement. On behalf of me, everyone else is expected to accept a spectrum of gender identities that I don't necessarily agree with. And so
Right.
when
Right.
I look at my sexuality, right, and my gender identity, I identify as a woman. I am a woman. I was born female, and I'm gender atypical, and I accept that in some ways. In other ways, I'm very, very gender typical, right? But in some ways, I'm very gender atypical. But don't you dare call me anything but woman, because it's bullshit if you do. And don't you dare call me anything but bisexual, because I don't accept the idea of a whole spectrum of genders that I have to list off to be able to say that I don't change my mind about how attractive a person is if their biological sex and their gender identity don't match.
Right. Yeah, you know, I'm just gonna just make a joke. I feel bad for the plus people. You know, the LGBTQI plus people. You know,
Yeah.
it's just what you're saying. Like they all just got lumped into this now plus thing because it's too much emotional labor to remember.
It's too much acronym.
Yes.
Too much
The
acronym.
plus is getting
Right.
bigger than the LGBT.
Exactly. You know, and you can argue about how many of those acronyms need to be in there, right? Because you're gay or what? You know what I mean? That's it. That's it. You're gay, and you're just lumping trans people in there to sort of, I don't know what, to like usurp the whole movement. You know what I mean? I don't lesbian and gay, right? Okay, so that's man and woman. Then you're queer and okay, whatever. You don't know what you are. You have different part. Fine, whatever. You're not heterosexual. That's it. That's it. This is the only fucking distinction between you and the people who only like PIV, right? That's it. That's it. So to put these labels on everyone and try to make you feel distinguished and different and somehow we're just going to assuage all of your anything that you need, your fears and your you know, your sensitivities. It's just, oh, just come, you know, we're going to give you a label, right? And why do you need to do this if, like, what is the point?
No, it's
I just don't
completely
get-
unnecessary. You know, I honestly, it's kind of like a mass infliction of obsessive compulsive personality disorder on people too.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
one of the things that can happen, and this isn't like OCPD is different for everybody, right? That has you have different things that you get obsessed with, and the intrusive, repetitive, you know, did I check this? Did I check this? Did I check this? This turns out to be different for a lot of people from each other. So
Yeah.
well, they just created a whole new spectrum of people for whom this is gender identity and sexuality and the connection between the two.
Yes.
You must have 1,000 labels. You have to memorize all of them. You have to keep track of all of them. And by the way, what are your pronouns? And I like, no, it's all bullshit. Not the fact that people are different and have different interests and preferences and attractions, and like that's not bullshit. But the fact that we have to have a unique label for every potential way in which you might be gender atypical, and a unique label for every sexual preference that might include interest in a person that has something about them that's gender atypical. It's all bullshit.
I mean, I don't know what else we expected to get from a society, from, you know, generations of giving people participation trophies. You know what I mean? Where everyone is just as good as you. It only breeds a situation where people are dying to stand out from the rest.
Yeah.
You know, you want to be seen as unique and individual, right? When everybody's telling you, no, you're just the same as everyone else. You're just as good as everyone else. You want to be seen as an individual. And if you don't have anything that you feel is uniquely, you know, special about you, I mean, that may just be your own, you know, your own insecurities about yourself. because everybody's got something about them that's great, you just you haven't tapped into it.
Right.
I really believe that, but people get so caught up in trying to fit in. They want to be seen as normal. And well, what the hell is normal? Normal shifts all the time, and what you really should be focused on is yourself. And am I being true to myself? Am I being respectful to myself? Am I going out into society and lying about who I am, and then coming home and, binge eating my emotions because I'm not being I'm not being true to who I fully am outside. It can wreck a person if that disconnect is there. So
yeah, it can, and then it also can put you in a situation where your potential for success is hindered by your focus, because you can't focus on what it takes to get there. And
Right.
this is something that has always bothered me about. So I mean, I was somewhat involved in LGBT activism in the 90s, and it's sort of in the 80s you'd see a little bit of like feminist narratives in there, but it wasn't the dominating narrative. In fact, the dominant narrative at the time was the outrage and fear over the level of violence that gay men specifically were facing, and that was a serious problem, and it continued throughout the 20th century. There's a level of violence that gay men have always faced that, if you look at the entire rest of the LGBTQ plus, alphabet soup spectrum, it's unique to gay men. And part of it is because they've been demonized with a false allegation of being associated with pedophilia. And they're not any more associated with pedophilia than any other sexuality, but it's been imposed. The stereotype has been imposed. And there's that, and the idea of just boundary issues in general has been imposed as a stereotype. And they're both bullshit, right? People in general, of all preferences, prefer to have relationships with people who want them, not with people who don't want them or aren't interested. It's abnormal to try to get sexual with somebody who is guaranteed to reject you, or who cannot achieve intimacy with you. And so that stereotype is bullshit, but it was used as an excuse for violence for forever. And it's just been in the 21st century that we've gotten to the point where it is abnormal for people to respond violently towards somebody because he is gay. And it's an achievement of epic proportions that just kind of got shuffled under the rug because during the 90s, the focus became about gay women's issues, trans women's issues, and a little less than that, trans men's issues, with the idea that at both parts of that were dominated by the feminine experience, when in reality, trans issues, the rejection of trans identities, that's basically people rejecting masculinity. People reject trans women because they see them as men, and people reject trans men because they see them as masculine women, not because they see them as effeminate. And and the same thing with lesbians. Most of the prejudice that you see against lesbians is inflicting the illusion of masculinity on them. Even butch lesbians aren't really necessarily masculine. In fact, some of them are some of the most effeminate people I've ever met. But yeah, it's all misandry. And of course, that got swept under the rug. That got completely obscured by female interests. And people like me got kind of pushed out because we could see that that was bullshit, and we could see that that was actually making the activism less about the people involved and more about the politics and more about obedience culture, and more about authoritarianism than it was about getting people to recognize each other as human beings and live in peace with each other in their communities. And so today, when we look at these issues, we're looking at these issues through a filter of feminist activism and feminist takeover of the LGBT movement that has pretty much killed any ability of society to reconcile with people who are not the norm. Because the norm is heterosexuality. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. Being abnormal doesn't make you bad, right? But our society now has to deal with its relationship, the relationship between the average citizen and people who are different, through a filter of the feminist idea that all of these issues are feminine issues, regardless of the gender and interests of the people involved, and that you have to be obedient to the ideology around these issues instead of just dealing with the individual in front of you as a human being with their own personal spectrum of experiences and attitudes and interests and behaviors. And it is basically making every individual in society vulnerable to harm, both on both sides of that. Both the people that are trying to figure out how to live in peace with people who are different from themselves, and the people who are trying to find their place in society while being different from the majority of the people around them. And it's not fair to anybody. It's not beneficial to anybody who doesn't want to exploit other people for political power and money. And it's not going to advance our civilization doing that. So we have to get to a point. In addition, for the purposes of this specific story, the woman who was the rape victim, the perpetrator who needs help, and the people who worked at the hospital who were put in a position of having to figure out a way to describe something they weren't allowed to acknowledge, the police who had to investigate it, and the community that has to know if somebody is dangerous, that that person's conditions that lead them to be dangerous are going to be addressed properly by the system. For all of us to be able to have peace, we have got to get past the use of ideology to address issues like this. It doesn't work. Allison, are you still with us?
Yeah, I know what I'm curious about, actually. How about the reverse situation? How about a woman with a vagina raping a trans woman? I'm sure it's happened.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it has too.
But of course, it doesn't make the media. In fact, I think I've heard about that. Like I've heard a testimonial about that on Reddit once. But I'm sure it's happened, but we don't hear that. I guess that just doesn't happen. Just like one of the things that really I find so hypocritical about all of this is that we are now discussing rape in female jails, inmate on inmate rape in female jails and prisons.
Yeah.
Now that trans women are allowed into, and people are getting extremely upset about how trans women are going to rape the female inmates. Well, what do you think the female inmates are doing to each other? At something like 4, I think it might be 3. I thought it was 2, but it might be 3 or 4 times the rate of male inmates. People don't know that. Female inmates rape each other at several times the rate of male inmates. Nobody talks about it. You don't ever see that kind of scenario in any of the groups that are trying to bring attention to prison rape. If they really were genuinely trying to bring attention to prison rape, they would be bringing attention to the overwhelming majority of perpetrators in both male and female prisons that are female. Like the overwhelming majority of rapists in male prisons, female wardens or female staff. Yeah. The overwhelming majority of rapists in female prisons, most likely female staff as well, and other female inmates.
Yeah, in fact, it's very stark in the juvenile system, at least. It's the staff is the majority of perpetrators in male juvenile facilities, and the inmates are the majority of perpetrators in female juvenile facilities. And then among staffers, women are less than half. They're like 43 or 45% of the staff in male facilities. And they perpetrate 95% of the sexual violence in those facilities.
No one who seriously wants to reduce the rate of rape, no serious person, the rate of rape, ignores the rate at which women rape. And I don't mean trans women. I just mean women. Like anybody who's like, yeah, reduce the rate of rape or trying to help rape. No, you're not. If you don't acknowledge the rate at which women rape, you don't acknowledge the problem, and you don't acknowledge the cover-up, and you don't acknowledge the inability of our society to recognize it as a, you're going to do nothing to change the rate of rape, to reduce it or to reduce the number of victims until you acknowledge these facts. So you're just not a serious person. In fact, I'm starting to suspect that everybody who doesn't acknowledge the rate at which women rapes wants to use it as a cash cow. So essentially, they're just using rape victims as a cha-ching. Yep. Each one has a price on their head, and they can just they can just skim off the cream of someone else's tragedy.
Yeah. Well, even when women are convicted, Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah,
that's a whole fucking story in itself. But her clients, it's crickets when it comes to the people who actually went to this woman and solicited her for her services. Those people are let off the hook. Now she's in jail, right? She's locked up. Oh my goodness. Oh my God, they got her. But did they really? I don't.
Well, I mean, they did. I guess that she didn't get to do the boyfriend defense. Wasn't successful.
Yeah.
Well, she hasn't been Epstein yet, so
your case has to be that famous, and there have to be that many people outraged, and it has to be basically a third rail for a judge to let you off before, as a woman, you get brick walled between you and the boyfriend defense. And even then, it was still taken seriously in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Can you imagine if Weinstein got up there and said, I was under the thrall of James Whale Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell.
It's Ghislaine. It's Irish.
Ghislaine Maxwell. I was under her thrall. She had me under her. So actually, to be honest, I think that would be more legitimate in a lot of ways, considering how sometimes men's brains sort of cave.
I mean,
when it comes to women.
She was very good looking. Very good looking woman. I can see men just fawning for her, right? But that's not why they came to her. They didn't come to her for her.
No, they came to her for the girls. Procure young girls, young women.
I wonder if there was boys too involved.
I'm sure. I am absolutely.
It probably just disappears into the mist.
We certainly haven't heard anything about it. We don't know, because if a boy comes forward or a young man comes forward and says, "This was done to me," unlike a girl, the compassion that he receives from the community around him is tainted with a stigma that he doesn't deserve. He deserves the compassion. He doesn't deserve the stigma. And it's something that feminists have complained that women face forever. but in reality, it's something that is actually inflicted on boys.
Yeah,
Yep.
and if you want to go down the rabbit hole of the whole Epstein Maxwell theory thing, whatever, and you look into, the paintings, right? A lot of the paintings that they talk about have boys depicted there as well. A lot of the statues, the artwork, all has
Yeah.
young boys depicted. It's not just young girls. They just don't talk about the young boys because they're disposable,
Well,
right?
there's another reason that the young boys we might not have heard from them. And this is one of the things that's really heartbreaking about sexual violence against boys in particular. They become up to 8 times more likely to commit suicide.
Hmm.
And in addition to overtly committing suicide, being up to 8 times more likely to commit suicide, they are between twice as likely and 44 times as likely, depending on the conditions and circumstances of their experiences, to engage in behaviors that I can consider suicidal, being
Yep.
drug abuse and alcohol abuse in particular, because you can drink yourself to death, you can drug
Hmm.
yourself to death, overdoses happen, getting tainted drugs happens, getting shot or stabbed while seeking your drugs happens. So all of these things, getting into an accident and dying in an accident because of your alcohol or drug use happens. Dying from health conditions later in life that were caused by using and abusing alcohol and drugs as a young person. Getting started at 10 years old down the path of drug and alcohol abuse leads to an early death. Like, it's inevitable, right? And then on top of all of that, they're also more likely to get involved in criminal behavior that can also result in their death. So they're, in particular, boys who are sexually assaulted or sexually violated are at increased risk of death as a result of things that are side effects of that abuse.
And that's relative to girls who are sexually violated. So whenever feminists out the lifetime statistics, the last year statistics show that men are equally vulnerable to rape relative to women. If you include the statistics from detention facilities, they're something like 2 or 3 times more vulnerable to rape than women in a year. But if you think about it, because male rape victims get no support and significant amount of stigma and condemnation from society, and in many cases the rape forms of rape that they experience are not just acceptable but almost institutionalized. When you look at the lifetime statistic and you say, wow, the lifetime statistics doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's like something like 5% of men versus 20% of women have experienced rape, and yet in the last year 1% of men versus 1% of women. But it starts to make a heck of a lot more sense when you realize those men are killing themselves.
Yeah.
And then the feminists turn around and use that statistic that's most likely a result of men not getting assistance for the things that they experience as rape victims, and they use it to not give them assistance for the things that they experience as rape victims. Now, people tell me that I shouldn't be an anti-feminist.
They can go fuck themselves.
You can go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
That entire framework is toxic from stem to stern. Now, I can recognize that some people get taken in by it because, I don't know, I got taken in by it because I thought that a woman's responsibilities was a feminist issue, and then I discovered through being slapped in the face by other feminists that no, actually, a woman's responsibilities isn't a feminist issue; it's an anti-feminist issue. And I said, well, see ya then. See ya. Not gonna be part of. Not gonna. Glad I'm not you. Goodbye,
Yeah,
feminism.
why would you want anything to do with an ideological movement that wants to kneecap women? Because that's basically what that is. That is like that scene in Misery where to help him write better, she breaks his ankle. Right? You can't leave now You can't get up and walk around on your own. You have to depend on me to take care of you. So do your job. Be our proxy victim. Feminism is malicious. It's malicious toward men. It demonizes men. It's malicious toward boys. It demonizes boys. It blames and shames and threatens and advocates directly for discrimination against people of all ages who are male. And then it exploits women.
Yeah.
And it handicaps women in order to facilitate that exploitation.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, Tanya Harding hitting Nancy Kerrigan,
Yep.
and Nancy Kerrigan's just sitting there going, "Why? Why?" That's what feminists do to women. They literally kneecap them, and then women are just saying,
figuratively.
and then figuratively, and then the rest of the
Psychologically.
women are just and they're all just sitting there going, why is this happening? What is this? Why?
Yeah, I remember reading
it as Munchausen's by proxy, writ large and spread wide.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Feminism isn't an ideology. It isn't a hypothesis. It isn't a theory. It isn't a conjecture. It isn't a religion. It's not a system. It's not even a cult. I'm going to defend this. It's not even a system of thought. It's an act of abuse.
Yeah.
Like literally, there's no logic behind feminism. There's nothing. Like, it's just when somebody says they're a feminist, they're basically saying, I am an abuser.
Yeah.
And I am going to use this particular pattern of words in order to inflict pain on you. And that's what I've seen. Then the few people who are like, oh yes, I believe in equality, they eventually get vastly disillusioned. Because any woman who doesn't support using these patterns of words in order to inflict pain on others end up getting excommunicated. Case in point, Kathy Young, Christina Hoff Sommers, Camille Paglia. I think even Nancy Grace, or I think it was Nancy Friday.
Don't forget
these are
Allison
the people who
Tiemann.
these are the people who get excommunicated from feminism, who are like, wait. No, actually and the reason why I say that feminism is a conjecture is because there's no logical thought behind it. Because they are appealing to the thing that they say doesn't exist. Only abusers do that. Yep. I mean, only an abuser would say, you would do this if you loved me, and you don't love me. Mm-hmm. Or, that's something that abusers say, and that's what feminists are saying to men all the time. And they're also gaslighting women by not allowing them to realize that the very thing that feminism relies upon is men's love for women. So at the same time as as feminists say, men, you hate us so much, you hate us beyond belief, you're dripping with hatred toward. Now demonstrate your love for us.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any goddamn sense?
None at all. And
even a cult sort of makes its own kind of internal sense. That doesn't, I think.
Right, and it also makes no sense at all for feminists to appeal to women's victimhood, right, and appeal to women's victimhood identity. And that is what they actually try to impose, is a victim identity on all women. You, as a woman, cannot have success that isn't owed to feminism. You cannot have peace that isn't owed to feminism. You cannot have security that you created for yourself. No, you have to owe that to feminism too. And the patriarchy, right? The patriarchy that doesn't exist, the patriarchy of feminist imagining, the patriarchy where men have power and women don't. Women are excluded from it, to put it their way, right? The patriarchy where we cannot acknowledge women's social influence and the pull that a woman's tears have on every aspect of a man's psychology. Right? We can't acknowledge those things. We're not allowed to admit that our fathers love us and take care of us, that our husbands love us and protect us and take care of us, and, as much as our fathers do, that our brothers love us and protect us, that our sons love us and look up to us, and in many, many, many cases practically worship us. Like, you do not diss a guy's mother.
No.
You want to see him be his worst toward you. You diss his mother, right?
Oh,
That's in seriousness, right?
That's cardinal sin.
Yeah. You can get away with that with a lot of gals, right? But not a guy, right? Boys grow up practically worshiping their mothers as goddesses and will forgive things from their mothers that no other human being would forgive another human being for. And yet, feminists would tell you that they are dominating and controlling and oppressing us from the time they are born, from the time they are completely helpless little babies, where at least in the United States, the first fucking thing their mothers do to them is give somebody permission to cut off a chunk of their flesh. Like, can you name anything that women do for men that is as profound as continuing to love someone who did that to you? Because I can't. And yet I know dozens of men who would immediately jump to the defense of their mothers for giving that permission. You know, even if they object to having had it done, they would still jump to the defense of their mothers for giving that permission.
That's not to say that men who are upset and actually feel feelings of hatred should be denied that.
No, they're just acting normally in comparison to, that's a valid response. It's a valid response to be angry at somebody who allowed somebody to do that to you when you were young and vulnerable, and their responsibility to protect. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I marvel at the ability of any man anywhere, any boy anywhere, to forgive that.
To rise above it, to forgive it and rise above it. Not that it's necessary in any means.
No,
to be honest,
I
would never say it's necessary.
I would refer to it as an almost godlike psychological feat of overcoming something that most people, an experience and a condition that most people simply could not. It's bigger than forgiving your rapist. Honestly. And, so when I look at this, with regard to the story, how we relate to the circumstances described in this story as just us in the room as women, or in the stream as women, and you look at this, I'm sure that the majority of women are going to look at this story as a woman's issue in terms of the female victim. They will not look at it as a men's issue in terms of the implications this has for male victims. They won't look at it as a men's issue in terms of the implications for men who have psychological problems that lead to perpetration of sexual violence and need treatment in order to not be that person and to just live a normal life in society and not end up on the wrong side of the law. And they won't look at it as a woman's issue in terms of the damage done by removing female accountability and removing women's compassion for men. There are two things there that have very deep, profound impacts on your ability to relate to the people around you and your ability to have successful relationships, including your business relationships, but in particular, your family relationships. If you don't have personal accountability and you don't have compassion for men, you cannot protect and provide for your children if they are male. You cannot be a full partner to your husband. You cannot be a full sibling to your brother. When your father gets old and he needs somebody to take care of him, are you going to be there? When your friends who are male have the same needs that your female friends have for someone to be there and support them as a friend? Are you going to be that person? Can you? If you are incapable of fully experiencing compassion for men, and if you are incapable of personal accountability for your interactions with the people that you love. So, feminists are robbing women of something deep and profound, a very central core part of our humanity. When women sign on to feminist narratives and feminist ideology, it's like selling your soul. And in my opinion, like Allison said, it's incredibly abusive. It's abusive to both sexes, and it doesn't benefit women in any way for the abuse that it heaps upon men. It just heaps abuse upon women too.
Yeah, and now trans women get to be involved in all of this, and feminists need to grapple with that, that thorny issue, because either trans women get the same benefits that feminism has awarded women, particularly women who rape and women who engage in domestic violence, or trans women, then feminists need to start saying that trans women, and good luck with that. I think you deserve everything that's coming to you if you do.
Yeah.
Good luck.
But the rest of us don't. We don't deserve to be stuck in a feminist world.
No, nobody does. Like trans women, men, trans men, nobody deserves to be stuck in a feminist. I mean, it's really simple. If you were stuck in our world, the woman would have been recognized as a perpetrator of sexual assault, and the other woman would have been recognized as her victim.
Right.
And it'd be so simple. You know, it's like like being able to submit your income taxes on the back of a single postcard. You know, it'd be so simple. The men's issues advocate or men's rights advocate version of reality, so streamlined. If you force someone to have sex, you're a sexual assaulter. That's how it works. You don't need 300 a tax code to understand what's happening when one person forces their genitals onto or into another person. You don't need that.
Left, right, A, B.
Jump!
Oh, jeez. Yeah, that's what we need. The Konami Badger code. But with that, I think we have pretty much. I can't think of anything else that really needs to be said about this issue. And we have a lot of things that have been said by people who are listening. So let's get into our super chats. Let me go back to. Because we have super chats from multiple sources and they don't all come to us through Streamlabs. I've got Streamlabs open and I'll take a look in there as well, but I'm tracking it independently through copying, pasting. So I think I have them all, unless we got anything through just the tip, and I don't have those, if we did. But Meredith G.
All I can say is I don't see anything currently.
Okay.
I mean, come on, guys. You definitely want just the tip, right?
Right.
Feed the Badger / just the tip. So somebody use it because it's. I thought the pun was very clever.
Oh, it is. It's definitely a good pun.
I'll defend myself by saying that. Okay, continue.
There we go. So, before the show started, Meredith G gave us $5 and said, "Honey for the Badgers. I have to miss tonight because I need some trivia redemption. Didn't want to give a mobile chat and cut Apple in on the action." So there we go. That's one. And then we have Zachary Please. I think that's how that's supposed to be pronounced. Gave us $9.99 and said, "What you are seeing is a natural progression of a secular empire. Empires led by men and not God. History shows us what ends up happening every single time, and we are seeing it once again. Cheers." Heart emoji. I have to disagree with that. not because I think that religion doesn't help people identify their moral code, but because if you look at the way religion helped people identify their moral code around sexual issues, men were responsible for women's welfare, right? And women were not necessarily responsible for men's welfare. So in terms of sex crimes, and particularly Abrahamic religions saw that as something that men did to women, but women didn't do to men. So it really remained gendered. Now, there was personal accountability for promiscuity, and is in those religions, but not necessarily for sexual predation, I guess would be the best way to put it.
The biggest criticism...
That's a big issue for me in terms of relying on religion to write for you your code of ethics and how it affects your code of morality.
Okay, just a couple things. First of all, I think one of the biggest things I criticize Christianity about, and I actually am not so sure that it's really predicated in the things that Jesus actually said, but the condemnation of male sexuality, the viewing of male as defiling the female, so that the purified female is in like one-to-one relationship with God, with no aspect of male sexuality intruding on women's reproduction. And it's impossible to get away from the mythology focused on that. And that condemnation of male sexuality as being impure and being sinful in a way, or a vector of sin into the next generation. And it is specifically the male part of the reproductive process that's condemned in this, because the female part, absent the male, is the closest way that people got to God in the Christian mythos. So there's a condemnation of male sexuality. And I think that what happened is that feminism marched straight through that door when we stopped having like the average person didn't necessarily believe in God in the same way as we did like 200 years ago. Feminism marched through that door and set up shop. And that's the door they marched through. That's the door that they got everybody through, was the condemnation of male sexuality. And that is definitely a Christian thing. The other thing is, I wouldn't minimize the effects of civic humanism, like the kind of civic humanism you'd see in like Milan, I believe, in Renaissance Italy, or its predecessor, which wouldn't have been called civic humanism, but had some similar concepts in the Republican Rome. And those weren't necessarily an aspect of religion. They were more men coming together to uphold the idea of being responsible for your society and responsible for your actions and their effect on your fellow man. So I wouldn't minimize the effect of those two situations on our current era. Because we wouldn't have our current era. We wouldn't have what we have today without those two time periods and the kind of thought that came out of those two time periods. So yeah, and again, I don't want to minimize Christianity or religion and its contribution, but at the same time, I think there's a serious flaw that needs to be corrected, and that is the condemnation of male sexuality. There is nothing wrong with male sexuality.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know how Christians get away from realizing that God created it. Okay. And if you're going to insist on having that be part of your religion, then the end result is things like feminism, like really, really, really ugly outgrowths of the condemnation of male sexuality.
Yep.
All right.
When it comes down to it, you can neither blame God nor rely on God when it comes to your internal behaviors. Everything you do, think, or say is behavior. It counts as behavior under psychology, and so your thoughts are behavior. And you can, according to the faith of Christianity, you can turn to God for support in your efforts to determine your behavior. And you can turn to God for guidance, but you still have to recognize within yourself what is right and wrong. You still have to recognize within yourself when you are doing harm and when you are not, when you are being helpful. And, to be honest, it's people and people's decisions regarding their religious beliefs, their religious dogma, that is responsible for all of this, and people who are going to fix it. So you can't use religion to eliminate gynocentrism. If people are gynocentric, religion will be gynocentric, whether God meant it to be that way or not. And it doesn't matter what religion you practice. I've seen a lot of gynocentrism in paganism, for instance, which is supposed to be more balanced, but it's not necessarily. And if you don't believe me, introduce yourself to a Dianic Wiccan sometime as a man and see what happens. But I personally don't recommend doing that necessarily unless you are carrying a shield. But in any case, you have to be responsible for yourself. And it doesn't mean that you can't be religious. But being religious doesn't mean that you are not responsible for yourself, right? It means you have support in taking responsibility for yourself. And it's something that people forget all the time in a whole lot of different religions. So, yeah. Albert Nader Retro gave us $20 and said, in Israel, India, and Great Britain, what we call forced to penetrate, rape isn't called rape because in these countries women can't be charged with rape. It's still a crime, just not rape. So it goes with trans women apparently. And I will point out, in Israel and India, just as in Great Britain, people pushed for rape laws to be made genderless. And in both of those countries, feminists, as a movement, women's advocates, basically protested the idea with the claim that men who committed rape would use false allegations against their victims to get out of rape charges, which I find ironic, since threatening to accuse a man of rape is one of the ways women use to commit rape. Let's see, and then we have from Rumble. These came next. I'm not even sure how to pronounce this. This is a series of letters and numbers. SDTGWE4TY. So it's something we 40. Gave us $1 and said, "Let them eat cake." From Hannah's description, I wonder how is whinging about lockdown checks any different? Yeah, in terms of the lockdown checks, this is one of the things that like everybody's like, oh, you're a total Trump supporter. Everything he did was right. No. I think that Trump should have nixed the whole idea of lockdowns, and he should have nixed the whole idea of essential workers and lockdown checks. Nobody should have stayed home except for the people who were genuinely, seriously vulnerable to death from COVID. And that was the elderly, people with certain health conditions. Everybody else should have gone about life as normal. And, this has been confirmed now. And it's really... We lost 2 years of normal life because of this. And we now have an entire economic, I don't know what to call it, big hole in the ground, I guess, that people are walking around and avoiding stepping in and not
even
looking
more
at,
of them. Can't have enough holes in the ground.
Yeah. All because people got paid to not work. And now we have people thinking that this should be a norm, as if this could just go on indefinitely. And we're actually creating the type of circumstances in the United States that led to hyperinflation in Germany. And if the dollar does what happened in Germany when hyperinflation occurred, the entire world may be fucked. Or at least the entire Western world. That's
well, any part of the world that hasn't decided to just
abandon,
say goodbye to Western influence.
Yeah, anything that doesn't have its own independent economic system, that doesn't at all under any circumstances rely on the American dollar, and we touch everything, right? So this is really bad. And people that are whining because the lockdown checks stopped are a huge part of the problem. But and it's a very different thing to pay people to not work than it is to take all the resources from people who are working, which is what the aristocracy was doing. In the United States, we work for what we have. We're proud of working for what we have. We have a growing segment of the population that doesn't understand that, and it's very disturbing, because when we don't work for what we have, and when we're not proud of working for what we have, we end up having less, we end up producing less, we end up experiencing less, and we end up losing the ability to tell the difference.
Yeah, and taking for granted what you actually do have.
Well, what we end up with is a system that is much like living as a serf. And we do create an elite, and they do have what everybody else doesn't. And nobody understands it, right? So it's dangerous. So there's similarities, but there's differences too. And then we got another dollar from the same person. And he said, I've always had a problem with carrot and stick due to my mental illness. However, I'm easily blindsided with how people work. But this opened my eyes. Is laziness worth the death penalty? All right, so now I'm not quite sure where that's going or coming from, because we aren't really talking about that. But, and in terms of the whole cake thing, that actually wasn't about work versus laziness. That was about whether or not you got to keep what you worked for. There's again a huge difference between questioning work versus laziness, and whether or not you deserve what other people worked for, versus saying, well, if you think that you have the right to keep what you work for away from the aristocracy, shame on you. You should just, go eat the leftover crust from inside the oven after the bread has been taken out. And then he gave us another dollar and said, never the death penalty reflects a reality as well. Those dangerous criminals could escape. And that's another discussion altogether. Like, I've done research on the death penalty, a lot of research on the death penalty, and someday I am going to have to do a show about it, but that's a really tough subject for me, because looking into it, I found information that genuinely made me sick. Like, I read things in succession and in proximity to each other, because I was researching this topic, and then for 3 days I was nauseous. It's a tough thing to look into. There are terrible things that we have allowed our so-called betters in government to do to our neighbors. That if people really understood what was happening within our prison system, people who don't have family members involved, it would horrify you. You would be outraged and angry, and people would be protesting against this en masse, because it's horrible. And I don't know how much I can emphasize that without going into specifics. And I don't know if we could even discuss all of the specifics of the topic on YouTube, because it's violent. So prison is violent. Our justice system is violent. Our justice system engages in things that, if it wasn't part of a justice system against our own people, if we did it to prisoners of war, would be considered war crimes. You have to think about that for a minute. And then if you really want to know, we do things to 10-year-olds in our prison system, in our justice system in the United States, that if we did them to adult prisoners of war from other countries, would be considered war crimes. So it's a tough topic. And someday I will make it an HBR Talk topic when I'm able to stay calm enough to discuss it. Catherine Scully gave us $5 and said, just look at Karla Homolka. That bee is a free woman married with 3 kids. For the non-Canadians, this is a woman, an equal participant, and an instigator of a 2-person sex crime against a minor that was particularly vicious and brutal, and a huge betrayal, because this was a minor that depended on her for protection and nurturing a family member. Then Albert Nader Retro gave us $5 Canadian and said, why wouldn't they think a trans woman would be raped in prison? I'll bet somebody like Blair White's size would be. Blair's not a particularly big person. And see, that's the thing. Feminists talk about trans women in women's prisons being a danger to the cis women in women's prisons. But there is already a huge prevalence of rape committed by cis women against other cis women in women's prisons. And there's also sexual misconduct between women in women's prisons and prison staff that are male. And it is very possible that a trans woman in a woman's prison would be viewed as an accessible man to female prisoners who are not lesbians, who might commit sex crimes. There are women who go to prison for committing sex crimes against boys. There are women who go to prison for committing abusive crimes against men. It's rare for women to be held accountable for abuse of men, whether it's domestic violence or sex crimes, but it does happen, and those women would be in prison with those trans women. So if you put a trans woman in a woman's prison for, say, a white collar crime, she's going to be in there with female rapists, and who might view her as a vulnerable man.
The other thing is that the trans women who seem to make the news are pretty, Helga, Valkyrie, like just jacked. But a lot of trans women aren't. They're small women. They're not overly tall. They're in a previous incarnation you might consider them femboy. Under like 5 foot, under like 100, like 120 pounds. These are not kids who are going to be much of a threat to the average woman. Now, 180 pounds on average, I think women are. 5'2". It's like this. I don't think this is considered in the cosmology at all. And I'm pretty sure that if it was, we would have had a few scenarios of women in prison raping trans women. But where are they? I'm guessing that nobody cares.
We're a lot.
This
less
is another
likely to hear about them.
Yeah, this is something I would suggest trans women look into. Like there are likely these issues in women's prisons. Women raping trans women. I guarantee it happens. So, that might be more fruitful than defending trans women who engage in sexual abuse. Find the trans women who are slipping through the cracks, who are victims of female aggressors, and you might get a bit more sympathy, or maybe not, because our society seems to be hell bent on excusing the vagina of any possible crime. So,
yeah. And with that, I think we've pretty much we've covered everything. We've covered all of the super chats that I'm aware of. Hopefully, I haven't missed anything. But thanks everybody for listening. This has been, I'll just say, no pun intended, this topic was a mouthful, and definitely a brainful. So thanks everybody for listening to this particularly broad and spicy sausage. Thanks to my two co-hosts for sticking this sausage out with me. And
did you just call us broads?
Yes, we are broads. Hey, I'm a lot more broad than I was when I was 20. Okay.
I'm broader than Broadway. Okay.
There we go. And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. There's a lot of hard work that goes into this that isn't done by me and isn't done by our two co-hosts, although Allison is one of the people that works in the background, so she gets credit for both. And good night, all.
Good night.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.